When the monarchy returned in 1660, so did poetry filled with wit, satire, and urban cynicism, very different from the moral fire of Milton or the loyalties of the Cavaliers. The satire of the Restoration Age, by writers like John Dryden, John Wilmot, who is also known as the Earl of Rochester, and Samuel Butler, was bold, often sexual, and mocking of both Puritan values and political corruptions, and sometimes deeply cynical. The key features of Restoration satire are its biting wit, its sexual frankness, its mock heroic style, political targets, that is a Tories versus Whigs scenario. The Restoration satire was influenced by Horace and Juvenal, and it had strong anti-Puritan, anti-hypocrisy themes. The Restoration satire was popular during the Restoration Age in English literature, which is also known as the Age of Dryden. Its dominance lasted from 1660 to 1700. Dryden is often called the founding father of English literary criticism. He is also celebrated for his satirical and political verse, his dramatic works, and his role in standardizing the heroic couplet in English poetry. John Dryden was England's first poet laureate in 1668 and still remains an influential poet in British literary canon. He has written some of the most valuable works that emerged from Restoration England, like Astrea Ruda, which is welcoming Charles II back, Annus Mirabilis, celebrating England's endurance through plague and fire, and also a brilliant satire called Absalom and Achitophel. Although Dryden was not a dramatist in the natural sense, and although his plays themselves have been but a limited degree of interest, his influence on the history of drama was considerable. This influence was largely negative, however. He killed off the worn-out Jacobean tradition, substituting for it his own form of heroic play, which was representative of the period. Dryden is credited with reforming English verse by introducing a more natural and conversational flow, which has had lasting effects on the language. Eliot argues that Dryden's poetry, though important, is overshadowed by his broader influence, particularly his ability to inspire later poets due to his approachable style. In the previous age, Donne had also been a reactionary by updating the language, doing away with the conversations of the regular lyric verse of the Elizabethans, and introducing into lyric poetry a conversational flow of normal speech. But by Dryden's time, the vitality of Donne's reaction had dissipated, and the normal had become false. So it was left to Dryden to restore English verse to normal speech. Dryden's reformation of language, moreover, has been lasting. Dryden is more important for his influence on the language than for his poetry itself. T.S. Eliot, in his essay on John Dryden, feels that the reason why Dryden's poetry did influence other poets was the fact that he was not so great as to be unable to influence them. Shakespeare and Milton were greater poets, but because they were greater, they were less imitable. They had mimics, but not followers. Dryden did not overshadow all followers by being too great. Therefore, he could influence others. Dryden's influence, in Eliot's view, has been enormous. Dryden felt that the English were without proper speech, and so he gave it to them. For this reason, no one has dominated English literature for as long or as completely as Dryden. But was Dryden simply a neoclassical writer? The scholar George Williamson coined the term anti-Ciceronianism to describe how 17th century English prose shifted towards simplicity and clarity, moving away from the long, ornate, flowery style associated with Cicero. However, Maurice Crowell, an earlier scholar, warned against taking the term too literally. He said the new writers weren't rejecting Cicero himself, but rather they were rejecting Cicero's followers from the 16th century, who imitated Cicero badly. So the criticism wasn't aimed at Cicero's actual brilliance, but at the overblown, artificial style of those who tried to mimic him in the later centuries. Interestingly, even these anti-Ciceronians still admired Cicero's rhetoric. They were just tired of his bad imitators. Meanwhile, Cicero and Quintilian were still read and respected in the 17th century, even as prose style moved towards simpler, more modern expression. Scholars tried to trace prose style changes in this period to various influences, like Seneca for brevity, science for clarity, Puritanism for plainness, but you can't reduce a writer's style to just one influence. Writers often draw on multiple, even conflicting traditions. In Dryden's case, his prose and criticism are shaped by both new trends like simplicity, clarity, and modern prose, and classical influences like Cicero and Quintilian. Scholars shouldn't assume writers like Dryden rejected classical rhetoric. They were reshaping it thoughtfully for a new age. Dryden wrote heroic plays. He was a champion of the heroic drama or heroic tragedy, full of grand speeches, noble characters, and epic conflicts, influenced by classical epics and French drama. His famous examples in these genres would be The Conquest of Granada, Aurangzeb, and All for Love. These plays were serious, grand, and often written in heroic couplets, not satirical or parodic. But he did not popularize mock heroic plays. That credit goes to later Restoration and early 18th century playwrights, who gently mocked heroic drama once it became too ridiculous or stale. By the time of The Rehearsal, published in 1671, a satirical play by George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham, even Dryden's own style was being parodied on stage. This period also saw the rise of literary criticism. Dryden's Essays of Dramatic Poesy, published in 1668, is the first real English literary criticism. Dryden also wrote mock heroic poetry. Dryden's mock heroic poem, Macflick Noe, is one of the first and most important of the genres. It mocks Thomas Shadwell, his literary rival, pretending to crown himself as the new king of dullness. Using the elevated language and structure of classical epics, like Virgil's Aeneid, to describe something petty and absurd. Such poems use satire to ridicule traditional heroic literature by either placing a foolish character in the role of a hero or exaggerating heroic quality to the point of absurdity. Just like Restoration satires, Restoration comedies were also quite playful and sexual in nature. Restoration comedy flourished after 1660s when the theaters reopened following the Puritan ban. These plays were written primarily for the aristocratic court audience of Charles II, known for their wit, fashion, and moral looseness. Restoration comedy is best known for its comedy of manners, which satirized the social behavior, romantic escapades, and hypocrisy of the upper classes. The genre is marked by witty dialogue, sexual innuendos, clever repartee, stock characters, and frequent use of disguise, mistaken identity, and intrigue. The stock characters include fop, which is a vain, overdressed man obsessed with fashion and appearance. He tries hard to be witty, but ends up looking foolish and is meant to be laughed at. Then comes the rake, the charming, rebellious, sexually adventurous male lead, who is witty, daring, and often immoral but irresistible. Sometimes he gets reformed by the end of the play, either due to love or due to marriage. The next is the wit, a clever, sharp-tongued character who engages in wordplay and repartee. Usually he is the voice of reason, and with him we have the blue stocking, a woman who is intellectual, well-read, and opinionated. But she's often mocked in comedy as being too serious or unfeminine. This represents early anxiety about women gaining education and agency. Finally, the coquette, a flirtatious woman who plays with men's affections but doesn't always want to settle down. She's independent, sharp, and knows the power of her charm. Some common plot devices or tropes of Restoration comedy are disguise, where characters often dress as someone else, especially women dressing up as men, in order to move freely in society or to test their love subjects. Mistaken identity, where one character is mistaken for other, leading to a chaotic mix-up. Intrigue, where secret plans get revealed. or lovers start sneaking around, or there are letters that are intercepted, secret marriages, double-crossing friends. All of this is pure theatrical gold. These characters and tropes make Restoration comedy a social mirror, mocking and exaggerating upper-class manners and gender politics. The audience loved seeing themselves dramatized and ridiculed with flair. Female characters were often bold, flirtatious, and sexually aware. Radical for their time, in fact. For the first time, actresses appeared on the public stage, which added sensuality and novelty to performances. The themes revolved around marriage as a social contract, infidelity, urban sophistication versus rural simplicity, and the double standards of gender and class. While critics saw it as morally corrupt, Restoration drama reflected the liberated spirit of post-Cornwellian era. The important plays written during this period are The Rover by Aphra Behn, Way of the World by William Congreve, Venice Preserved by Thomas Ottaway, and The Country Wife by William Wycherley. Now, while one stream of sensuality and sexual innuendos was going on in Restoration satire and Restoration comedy, at the same time another stream of ideas was moving in an opposite direction. The trauma of civil war, regicide, exile of king, the plague, and the fire had left intellectuals craving order, stability, and logic. After so much chaos, writers and thinkers started turning to the classics of Greece and Rome for models of reason, balance, order, moral clarity, and civic responsibility. Neoclassicism offered a framework, a way to write and think that made sense of the chaos. Writers like Dryden started looking to Horace, Virgil, and Aristotle for inspiration, not just in content but also in form. That's why you have two currents running side by side during the Restoration. But remember that both of these currents would serve different audiences and cultural needs. Neoclassicism will begin with an emphasis on order, decorum, reason, clarity, and balance. And satire would emerge out of this neoclassical period, which would extend from the age of Dryden to the Augustan age and the age of Johnson. You can know more about the age of Augustus and the age of Johnson in these lectures.